David Blythe had never expected to make history. In fact, until a few months ago, he had been an ordinary man living in a small town on Earth. He had a quiet job as an accountant, a few close friends, and a passion for science fiction novels. He never imagined he would be sitting at a desk, filling out an official form to adopt 3 alien children from another galaxy, yet here he was. In the midst of the Galactic Adoption Bureau's online application system, typing away with an unshakable determination, his fingers hovered above the keyboard as he read the questions one last time. His application to adopt alien children seemed impossible.
Ow.
Even to him. But he knew deep down it was the right thing to do. The children he hoped to adopt were from a species known as the Kaltari. They were an advanced race, far more intelligent and technologically sophisticated than humanity. The Kaltari had evolved to communicate through telepathy, and their minds were linked in ways no human could ever understand. Their society was built on mental connections, where every member shared knowledge and feelings with each other effortlessly. They were the galaxy's intellectual elite. They held a reputation for being cold, detached, superior to most other species. The adoption process was incredibly strict. Only beings with certain advanced qualities were allowed to adopt Kaltari children. After all, the Kaltari needed to be raised in a society that could support their mental abilities, their need for intellectual stimulation, and their telepathic needs. It was unheard of for a human, a species regarded as primitive by most of the galaxy, to even consider applying. David's application, however, was far from ordinary. He wasn't just applying for a child, he was applying to take on a responsibility unlike any other. The idea came to him one evening while reading a report about the Kaltari. It described how the Kaltari children had been orphaned in a tragic accident. And now, the Galactic Federation was seeking parents for them. David didn't know why, but something in him stirred. It was as if he could hear those children calling to him from across the stars. Maybe it was his lifelong love for alien stories and far-off worlds. Maybe it was the strange desire to prove that humans had more to offer than what others believed. But most of all, it was his innate belief that love and understanding could bridge any gap, even one as vast as the galaxy. So, as David filled out the application, the Galactic Adoption Bureau wasn't just any ordinary government office. It was a grand, sleek building, designed to impress anyone who might enter. The Bureau's headquarters was located in a massive city on Lighter, a neutral planet at the center of the galaxy where representatives from every known species gathered to govern the galaxy's various factions. The building's architecture was striking, with tall glass walls and shimmering blue lights that pulsed with an otherworldly glow. It was a place where decisions were made that affected entire civilizations. David wasn't physically there. He was miles away on Earth, sending in his application through an intergalactic network. But he could imagine it. The moment the application was sent, it went through several filters. First, to the Kaltari Guardians, who were responsible for approving adoptions for Kaltari children. Then to the Galactic Federation, which reviewed all interspecies adoption cases. David knew he was in for a challenge. The response didn't take long to arrive. It came in the form of a short, dismissive message. "We regret to inform you that your application to adopt Kaltari children has been rejected. Due to the nature of the Kaltari's telepathic abilities and cultural needs, only advanced species with comparable abilities may apply." David read the message several times, feeling a heavy weight in his chest. It wasn't a surprise, but it still stung. They didn't even give him a chance to explain himself. To the Federation, he was just another human, a member of a species barely capable of interstellar travel, let alone raising children of a species like the Kaltari. But David wasn't the kind of person to give up easily. He couldn't. Determined, he sent a second message, this time a personal one. He poured his heart into the words, explaining his background and his passion for the Kaltari. He spoke of his love for alien cultures and his belief that the heart, not advanced technology or psychic abilities, was the most important quality in any parent. He told them that he didn't need to be telepathic or have advanced technology at his disposal. He just needed the willingness to love and nurture. The response came days later. But it wasn't what David expected. He was granted a hearing. David stepped into the Galactic Adoption Bureau's virtual meeting room, nervous but resolute. He had been instructed to connect through a secure link, and now he found himself facing a panel of 6 representatives from various species, including a Kaltari. He felt small as he looked at the faces on the holographic screen. The panel members were beings from all walks of life, some with alien skin and unusual features, others with calm, distant expressions. The Kaltari representative, Jera, had a smooth, silvery face with eyes that glowed a soft green. She looked down at him from the screen with an air of quiet authority. Her telepathic abilities were apparent in the way her eyes seemed to peer straight into his soul. The other representatives glanced at each other. Then at David. They waited. "Mr. Blythe," the Zatharan representative said, his voice low and rumbling. "Why do you believe a human your species would be suitable to raise Kaltari children?" David took a deep breath. He had been preparing for this moment for days. His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I believe it's because of what humans have," he began, his voice steady. "We have the ability to connect. Not through telepathy or advanced technologies, but through something far deeper. We understand love, sacrifice, and the importance of empathy. We might not be the most advanced species, but we know how to care for others. And that's what these children need more than anything. They need someone who will truly see them for who they are, not just as beings with exceptional abilities, but as children who need love and care." There was a long silence as the representatives considered his words. David could feel their skepticism, but also a flicker of something else, curiosity. "Interesting," Jera said, her voice calm and soft. "You are the first human to apply for such an adoption. Many of your kind have not shown this kind of understanding." David smiled slightly. "We may not be perfect, but we try. And if you give me a chance, I will do everything I can to prove that we are capable." The panel remained silent for a moment. Then the Zharan representative spoke again. "We will give you one chance, Mr. Blythe. One trial period. You will meet the children and be observed for a period of 3 months. At the end of that time, we will decide whether or not you are fit to adopt." David's heart soared. This was more than he had hoped for. He didn't know what the outcome would be, but he was determined to try. For the first time, he felt that his dream was within reach. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The panel nodded, and the connection was cut. David sat back in his chair, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. He had done it. He had proven that even a simple human like him could make a difference. Now it was time to meet the Kaltari children. David Blythe sat nervously in the sterile white room, staring at the blank wall ahead of him. His palms were sweaty, his heart was racing, and he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of anticipation. He had come so far since that first application. Now he was about to meet the Kaltari children. He had been given a trial period, a chance to prove himself, and he couldn't afford to mess it up. 3 months to show that a human, with all his imperfections, could raise these extraordinary children. The room was nothing like Earth. There were no familiar comforts, no soft chairs or warm colors. It was a high-tech, cold environment, as if everything was designed to remind him how different this place was from the home he had known. The walls were smooth and metallic, lit by soft, pulsating lights that glowed faintly in the air. The floor beneath him was firm and clean, with no signs of wear or life. Everything was perfect. Everything except him. He ran a hand through his hair and sighed. How had he gotten here? This wasn't the kind of thing ordinary people did, even now. The other members of the Galactic Adoption Bureau were probably laughing at the idea of a human adopting Kaltari children. Humans were barely capable of intergalactic travel, let alone understanding the complex emotions and telepathic minds of beings as advanced as the Kaltari still. Here he was. A soft chime echoed through the room, signaling that the children were about to be brought in. David stood, trying to steady himself, wiping his palms on his pants. He could hear footsteps approaching, soft yet purposeful. The door slid open, and 3 figures stepped into the room. The children were not what he had expected. They were small, perhaps no older than 6 or 7 years in human terms, but their eyes were sharp, and their presence filled the room. They moved with a grace that reminded David of animals in the wild, their movements fluid and precise. Their skin had a faint silvery tint, and their eyes glowed a soft, translucent blue. It was clear they were not human, yet they felt familiar. The first to step forward was a girl, Vara. Her hair was long, white, and fine, almost ethereal, as if it were made of light itself. She stared at David with wide eyes that seemed to pierce through him. Her expression was unreadable. But there was a quiet intelligence in her gaze that made David feel small. The second was Nico, a boy with short, spiky hair and a lean build. His posture was defensive, and he stood slightly apart from the others, his arms crossed over his chest. He had a stubborn look on his face, as if he didn't want to be here, didn't want to be around a human. The third child. Lyra was the youngest, and she looked the most uncertain. Her small form trembled slightly as she looked around, her big eyes darting from David to the other children. Her skin shimmered like liquid silver in the low light, and she seemed to be constantly adjusting to the new environment, as if she wasn't sure where she was or what was happening. David swallowed. He had spent so many nights thinking about this moment, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure how to begin. He had never been a father before, let alone the father of 3 alien children. He crouched down to their level, trying to appear less intimidating. "Hi there," he said softly, offering them a smile.
"My name is David.
I'm here to be your parent, if that's all right." Vara didn't respond. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him. Nico snorted and muttered something under his breath that David didn't quite catch. Lyra remained silent, her eyes wide with curiosity, but her posture still held a trace of fear. David felt the weight of their gaze. He couldn't just stand there like a nervous fool. "I know this must be strange for you," he said, his voice steady despite his growing nervousness. "But I want you to know that I'm here to help you. I don't know everything about you or your people, but I promise I'll do my best to understand." The silence stretched on, and David began to wonder if this was a mistake. Maybe he wasn't cut out for this after all. Maybe the children could sense how unsure he was, and that's why they hadn't responded. Finally, Vara spoke. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it cut through the tension like a blade. "Why do you care?" she asked, her words directed at him. "Why would a human want to take care of us?" David blinked in surprise. He had expected silence, not a question. He wasn't prepared for this. But he had to answer. "Because I believe everyone deserves love," he said quietly. "I know you've been through a lot, and I can't undo what's happened. But I want to be there for you. I want to help you heal if you'll let me." There was a pause as the children processed his words. For a moment, none of them moved. Then Nico scoffed, his arms still crossed. "You're just a human. What do you know about us? You can't even understand our minds. You can't even understand how we feel." David's heart sank. He could feel the truth in Nico's words. It was hard for him to even imagine what it would be like to be one of them. He couldn't hear their thoughts, couldn't share their memories. He wasn't telepathic, wasn't anything like them. But he didn't back down. "You're right. I don't understand everything about you. But I understand what it's like to feel lost, to feel like no one sees you. I've felt that way too. I may not know exactly what you're going through, but I do know that I want to be someone you can trust." Vara was still studying him, her piercing eyes fixed on his face. Lyra, on the other hand, had moved closer to him, her small hands clutched together nervously. She didn't say anything, but her wide eyes seemed to soften as she watched him. "I don't expect you to trust me right away," David continued, "but I'll earn it. I'll show you. If you give me a chance, I'll prove it." A long silence filled the room, and David began to wonder if the children would ever open up. He had never been a father, never known what it was like to raise children, let alone alien children with powers far beyond his comprehension. He felt small, insignificant, but then something unexpected happened. Vara stepped forward, her eyes not quite as guarded as before. "What happens if we don't trust you?" she asked, her voice quieter now. David smiled gently, his heart swelling at her question. "If you don't trust me, that's okay. I won't force you. I'll just be here, and I'll be patient. I know it won't be easy. I know you're scared, and I'm scared too. but I'll never give up on you. I promise. Vara studied him for a long moment, and then, without another word, she turned to Nico. The two children exchanged a glance, one that David couldn't quite understand. But he knew there was something there. Maybe they were communicating in a way that didn't require words. Or maybe they were just figuring him out in their own way. Finally, Lyra took a small step forward, her tiny voice breaking the silence. I think we can try, she said softly. David's heart skipped a beat. He had never felt so relieved in his life. He didn't know what the future would hold, but in that moment, it felt like a small victory. Thank you, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, and just like that, the trial had begun. The first few days of David's trial, as the adoptive parent of the Kaltari children, were not what he had expected. He had imagined that the hardest part would be the initial meeting, the moment of first contact. But in reality, that had been the easiest. It was the days that followed, the quiet moments in between, that were the true test. David wasn't sure what to do with the children. They were so different from human kids. They didn't need to be entertained the way humans did. They didn't cry for attention or constantly demand his time. Instead, they were quiet, distant, and often lost in their own thoughts. He would come home from work each day to find them sitting silently. Their eyes focused somewhere far beyond him, somewhere he couldn't reach. There were no tantrums or arguments, but there were also no smiles or laughter. Vara, Nico, and Lyra seemed like shadows of their former selves, trapped in a world that was no longer their own. At night, he would sit at the small dinner table with them, trying to engage them in conversation. But it was clear that they didn't want to talk. They didn't want to share anything with him. Not their thoughts, not their feelings, not their fears. They were guarded, closed off. It was as if they were waiting for something, waiting for him to prove he was worthy of their trust. One evening, after dinner, David sat alone in the small living room, his mind racing. He had been patient with them. He had been kind. But now, as the days dragged on, he could feel something slipping away. It was as if the children were silently rejecting him, testing his resolve. And it wasn't just them. David had begun to feel the weight of the entire situation, the pressure of representing humanity to the galaxy, the doubt that the Kaltari children would ever truly accept him. The Federation's representatives had warned him that this might happen. They had told him that the Kaltari children had been through too much, that their minds were fragile, that no matter how hard he tried, they might never truly let him in. But David wasn't ready to give up. He couldn't be. He had already come this far. It was late that night when the first message came through a communication from the Galactic Federation. David had been expecting something like this. The email was short and to the point. We have received complaints regarding your suitability as a parent. The Kaltari children are not adapting as expected. It is our recommendation that you reconsider this adoption. David read the message again. Then again, the words were like a slap in the face. He had known this could happen. He had been warned. But the rejection stung more than he had anticipated. As he stared at the screen, the door to the living room creaked open. He looked up to see Vara standing in the doorway, her silver hair glowing faintly in the dim light. She didn't speak. She simply stood there, her expression unreadable. David wiped his eyes, feeling a sudden lump in his throat. Vara, he said softly, I'm trying my best. I really am. But if you and your siblings don't trust me, I don't know how I can keep going. Vara didn't respond right away. She stepped into the room slowly, her eyes focused on him. You are not the problem, she said at last, her voice low and measured. The problem is that we were never meant to be here. David was taken aback by the admission. What do you mean? He asked, standing up from the couch and taking a cautious step toward her. We don't belong here, Vara continued. We were never supposed to be part of your world. Our minds are ... different. We can't connect with you the way you need us to. You can't understand us, and we can't understand you. David felt a pang of frustration. I'm trying, he said, his voice shaking slightly. I'm doing everything I can. I might not be able to read your thoughts, but I'm here for you. I want to help. Vara's gaze softened, but only slightly. "That's what we don't understand," she said. "You're human. You are so different from us, and yet you're here. You're trying so hard. It doesn't make sense." David took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. Maybe that's what makes it work. Maybe I'm not supposed to understand everything. Maybe I don't need to understand. What matters is that I care, and I'm not going to give up on you. For a moment, Vara didn't respond. She just stared at him, her eyes searching his face. Then she nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Before turning and walking away, David stood there for a long time, feeling both encouraged and defeated. The conversation had been small, but it had been the most honest one they had had so far. It wasn't much, but it was something. The next morning, he received a follow-up message from the Federation. It wasn't the response he had hoped for. The letter outlined a series of formal complaints from the Keltari Guardians, complaints about David's inability to connect with the children on a deeper level, about his lack of advanced telepathic training, and about his primitive methods of parenting. David read through the message, his chest tightening with every word. He knew the Federation didn't understand. They didn't understand the most important thing: love and patience couldn't be measured by a standard formula. You couldn't grade humanity on the same scale as advanced telepathic species. They didn't get it. The decision was coming. The trial period was almost over, and the Federation would soon decide whether or not David was fit to keep the children. If they decided against him, it would mean that the children would be removed from his care. They would be sent to another family, one more suited to their needs. David sat down at the kitchen table, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. What could he do? What could possibly change the Federation's mind? How could he prove that he wasn't just a human who had no place raising such extraordinary children? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps caught his attention. He looked up to see Nico standing in the doorway, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. The boy's expression was difficult to read, but his posture was defensive, almost hostile. David felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't been able to connect with Nico in the same way he had with Vara, and it seemed as though the boy was rejecting him more and more each day. He didn't know how to reach him. "I don't think we're meant to be here either," Nico said quietly, his voice cold. "I don't think we're supposed to stay with you. Maybe we're too... different." David's heart sank. This was what he had feared, that the children would never be able to trust him, that he would fail them. But before he could finish, Nico stepped forward and, surprisingly, placed a hand on his shoulder. "But maybe you're not giving up on us either," he said softly, his eyes meeting David's. "Maybe that's the difference. You're still here." David blinked, surprised by the boy's words. For the first time, Nico's walls seemed to crack just a little. "I don't know if you'll ever understand us," Nico continued. "But I think we might start trying to understand you." It wasn't much, but it was something. A breakthrough, however small, was still a breakthrough. And in that moment, David knew he couldn't give up, not now, not ever. His journey with the Keltari children was far from over. The road ahead would be hard, but he was more determined than ever to prove that humanity had something valuable to offer, even in a galaxy full of superior species. The days that followed David's conversation with Nico were a strange mix of hope and doubt. The walls between David and the children hadn't come down completely, but there was a subtle change in the way they interacted with him. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but David could feel the air between them, thickening with unspoken understanding. It was like the children were beginning to test him in a new way, to see if he could hold on, even when they tried to push him away. The atmosphere in their small home had transformed too. Where there was once a cold silence, there was now the occasional quiet conversation. Vara had started to share small thoughts with him, nothing big, nothing deep, but enough for David to sense a crack in the fortress they had built around their hearts. Nico, too, had begun to speak a little more. He wasn't exactly friendly, but he was less hostile. Lyra, the youngest, was still the most reserved, but she would sit near David sometimes, drawing shapes in the air with her fingers, her eyes focused, as if searching for something she hadn't found yet. David was still walking a tightrope, uncertain of each step, but there was something in him that refused to give up. He had seen a flicker of trust in their eyes, even if it was small. That flicker was all he needed to keep going. One afternoon, David was sitting in the living room reading a book when the door chimed. It was a quiet, subtle sound, but it was enough to alert him. He glanced up from his book to see the children standing in the doorway. They were all together, and this time, something was different in the way they looked at him. It didn't seem quite as distant. "David," Vara said, her voice still quiet, but no longer with that harsh edge it once carried. "We need to talk." David put his book down, his heart picking up speed. "Of course. But what's on your mind?" "What?" The children stepped into the room, their eyes all focused on him, but they weren't standing in their usual guarded stances. Instead, they were facing him as a group, almost as if they had come to a decision together. For the first time, David felt like they were truly seeing him not just a human trying to care for them, but as someone they could possibly trust. "We've been thinking," Nico said, his arms still crossed, but his posture was less defensive, "and we've realized something. Could this be the moment? Could they finally be ready to take the next step? We don't have to be the same as you," Vara said, her voice steady. "We don't have to share the same thoughts or memories, but we can learn from you." David's heart swelled at her words. "I don't need you to be the same as me," he said quietly. "I just need you to know that I'm here for you. I'll help however I can, no matter how long it takes." Lyra, who had been standing in silence until now, took a small step forward. Her voice, when it came, was hesitant but clear. Maybe we've been wrong," she said softly, looking up at David. Maybe you're not so different from us after all." David's chest tightened with emotion. The words he had longed to hear, the breakthrough he had been hoping for, were finally coming from their lips. It felt like everything had shifted in that one moment, a world of barriers collapsing. "You're not alone," Nico said. "We're not alone." David stood up, a smile spreading across his face, despite the tears that threatened to well up in his eyes. He had come so far. They had come so far. "I won't ever leave you," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to face this alone. I'm here, and I'll always be here." That afternoon was a turning point, not just for the children, but for David as well. The barriers between them were beginning to crumble, and he could sense that. The children were starting to understand something important, that the love he offered them wasn't based on what they could do for him, but on what they could be with him. It wasn't about fitting into a mold. It was about giving each other the freedom to grow, even if that meant taking small, tentative steps. For the next few weeks, the children slowly began to open up more. It was subtle at first, with little things: Vara offering to help him cook dinner, Nico asking him about his life back on Earth, and Lyra sitting beside him during their quiet nights, her eyes more focused on him than ever before. The silence between them was beginning to ease. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of uncertainty, moments when the children would retreat back into themselves. But the walls that had once separated them were weakening. David knew there was still a long way to go. The Kaltari children had experienced trauma that no human could truly understand. They had lost everything: their home, their family, their world. But David's presence, his unyielding commitment, and his willingness to love them without expectation seemed to be making a difference. But even as things began to improve at home, there was still a shadow hanging over them. The Galactic Federation had been watching. The trial period was coming to an end, and the decision about whether David would be allowed to keep the children was fast approaching. The Federation was still uncertain. They didn't trust that a human could handle the responsibility, and they didn't believe that the Kaltari children would truly thrive in a human environment. David's heart sank whenever he thought about the Federation's final judgment. He knew they hadn't seen the children in the way he had. They hadn't watched as the children slowly started to trust, as they learned to share their thoughts and feelings, however small those steps might have been. The Federation didn't know the quiet victories the way Nico had finally smiled at him after a particularly difficult day, the way Lyra had started drawing pictures of Earth's landscape, as if she were beginning to understand that this place could be home. One afternoon, just a week before the final decision, a Federation official arrived at their doorstep. David knew it was coming. Jera, the Kaltari representative, stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She had come to assess the situation. For herself, to make the final judgment about the adoption. "Mr. Blythe," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I'm here to evaluate the progress of the children. I will be observing them closely for the next several days." David nodded, his stomach tightening. "I understand. Please take whatever time you need." Jera entered the house, and David led her to the living room, where the children were waiting. They stood together, as if they had rehearsed this moment. Vera, with her calm, steady gaze. Nico with his arms crossed, but his stance not quite. As closed off as before, Lyra, who looked at Jera with quiet curiosity. David watched as Jera studied them, her eyes moving from one child to the next, observing their behavior, their interactions. For a long time, there was silence. David could feel the weight of the moment. This was it. This was the judgment he had been dreading. Finally, Jera spoke. "You've done something extraordinary, Mr. Blythe," she said quietly. "These children, they are beginning to trust you. They are beginning to heal." David's heart leapt in his chest. "Does that mean?" Jera nodded, a rare, small smile appearing on her face. "The Federation may not fully understand your methods, Mr. Blythe, but it is clear to me that you've proven something important, that love and care can bridge even the most impossible of gaps. These children have started to find a home here in a way I didn't think was possible." David couldn't hold back the tears that threatened to spill. The relief, the joy, was overwhelming. "The adoption will be approved," Jera continued. "You will keep them, Mr. Blythe. They are yours." For the first time, David didn't just feel like a human trying to prove something to the galaxy. He felt like a father. And in that moment, he knew that he and the Coultry children had begun a new chapter together. David Blythe sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the planet's skyline. The stars twinkled in the distance, far away, but they felt closer now. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind, full of ups and downs, moments of doubt and hope. But now, as the Federation's decision had been made, David was starting to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The Coultry children were still adjusting. They still had moments of uncertainty, still pulled away at times, but there was something new about the way they interacted with him now, something more open. They were healing. And that healing was not just a personal victory for them, but for David as well. It had become a bond, one stronger than any barrier between species, stronger than any judgment the Federation could impose. As David sat at the table, thinking back over everything that had happened, he was interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps behind him. Vara, Nico, and Lyra entered the room, their faces bright with something they hadn't shown in a long time. Hope. David turned and smiled. "Hey, how's it going?" Vara was the first to speak. "We've been talking," she said, her voice steady but filled with a new light. "We've been talking about what comes next. What happens now that we together." David nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "I'm glad you're thinking about that. What do you want to do?" Nico, who had always been the more skeptical of the three, gave David a small, thoughtful glance. "I think we're ready," he said slowly. "Ready to learn more about you? About Earth? About your world?" David felt a lump in his throat. For so long he had wondered if the children would ever accept him fully, if they would ever be able to truly see him as their father. And now, with Nico's words, it was clear they had started to see him. They were ready to embrace what came next. That's wonderful," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "There's a lot to show you. Earth is different, of course, but I think you'll like it. It's a beautiful place." Lyra, who had been quietly standing behind the others, stepped forward, her face soft with understanding. "We're ready to see Earth. But what about the others?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "What about the Federation?" David took a deep breath. The Federation had never been kind to him. They had always doubted him, always considered humans too primitive to raise beings as extraordinary as the Coultry children. But in the end, they had given him a chance. They had allowed him to keep them. And now, it was up to him to show the galaxy that humanity had something valuable to offer. "I think," David said, pausing for a moment to choose his words carefully, "that it's time to show the Federation, and everyone else, what humans are capable of. Not through technology, not through telepathy, but through love. We've all come a long way together, and that's something I want to share with the galaxy. There was a silence in the room, a quiet weight to David's words. The children, who had been so distant at first, now stood a little taller, a little stronger. They had found something in themselves that they hadn't known existed, and David had helped them find it. Together, they had created a family. The next few days passed quickly. The children began to adjust more and more to life on Earth. They had already learned the basics: how to communicate in the human language, how to adapt to Earth's environment, but now they were eager to explore the world. David showed them the sights, introducing them to parks and cities, places where they could see the diversity of humanity, where they could understand the beauty of Earth in a way that was more than just intellectual. But as the children embraced their new life, David knew that the Federation wasn't finished with him yet. They had allowed the trial period, but now they would want to see results. The adoption might have been approved, but the real challenge was about to begin. David would have to prove that this was not a mistake, that the Kaltari children, despite their advanced abilities and unique needs, could thrive in a human world. One afternoon, as David and the children walked through a bustling city, David received a message from the Galactic Federation. It was from Jera, the Kaltari representative who had witnessed their progress firsthand. "Mr. Blythe," the message began, "the Federation has reviewed your case, and after careful consideration, we are pleased to inform you that your adoption of the Kaltari children has been deemed a success. You have proven that humans are capable of creating a nurturing and supportive environment for even the most unique of beings. We will be monitoring the situation closely, but for now, you have been granted the official status of guardian for the Kaltari children. Congratulations." David stared at the message, his heart racing. The words seemed almost too good to be true. The Federation, the same organization that had once laughed at him, was now acknowledging his success. He had done it. They had done it. He turned to the children, who were standing by his side, looking up at him with expressions of curiosity. Their faces were still so young, so uncertain, but now there was something more in their eyes. Something that wasn't just the distance of the past, but the possibility of a future. "I guess you've heard the news," David said, his voice a little shaky. "We did it. The Federation is on our side." Vara, Nico, and Lyra exchanged glances, their faces softening. Then Vara spoke. "We knew you could do it," she said quietly. "We always knew you could. You never gave up on us. Even when we didn't believe." David smiled, tears welling in his eyes. "I couldn't give up on you. Not when I knew what we could be." The children stepped forward, and for the first time, David felt the full weight of what they had become together. It wasn't just that they were an adoptive family. They'd become something more. They had become proof that love could break down any barrier, no matter how impossible it seemed, in the weeks that followed. The Federation began to recognize the significance of what David had accomplished. Representatives from other species came to visit, to see for themselves how humans had managed to form such a unique bond with the Kaltari children. They watched as David and his family moved through their days, as the children learned and grew, slowly starting to understand the complexities of the human world. The Federation, once skeptical, was now intrigued. David wasn't just the human who had adopted the Kaltari children. He was a symbol of something greater. He was the living proof that humanity had something to offer the galaxy, something no other species had, an unmatched capacity for love, for empathy, and for connection. David knew there was still much to do. There would be challenges ahead, there always would be, but now, for the first time, he felt like he was no longer fighting alone. He had his family by his side, and the galaxy was starting to see that humans were capable of more than they had ever imagined, as he watched the children laugh together in the park, running through the grass as if they had been doing it their whole lives. David felt a deep, peaceful certainty wash over him. The future was still unknown, but it was bright. And for the first time, he was excited to face it together with his Kaltari children, in a galaxy that was beginning to realize just how special humanity truly was.